Hi, this is Paul. A couple of people asked about the Daily Wire exclusive video. On Daily Wire, you have usually an ad-free edition of what's on YouTube in terms of the Jordan Peterson podcast. And then there's a Daily Wire exclusive video, which is usually a half hour to an hour, often of personal background information, deeper into a particular thing, something Jordan wants to talk about. In this case, again, as is often the case, the Daily Wire exclusive video is usually quite interesting because it's usually a little shift in the conversation from the YouTube segment. And on this Daily Wire exclusive video, they went more into the business side of The Chosen and the history of sort of raising it as a business in The Chosen, or raising The Chosen as a business, and how they raised money. And first, and when they sort of had they were going to have it on YouTube for 2 weeks and then take it down. And then they began to notice that this was greatly extending its reach and that people would then participate financially because they needed financial contributions to fund the whole thing. And so that was really a very interesting discussion. Now, part of what makes that interesting is most of us are not just what we are. In other words, I'm a minister, I'm a pastor, but I've also got other interests in other areas. Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist. He's very interested in political formation, or let's say civilizational mythology, but he's also an entrepreneur. And so Jordan often has ideas about success, about how to monetize things, about how to make things work. And he talks about, this is a fairly common theme as he goes through things. And in fact, he's had a series on Daily Wire about success that I haven't listened to, but I am now planning on listening to it for a couple of different reasons. So part of this gets into Jordan's ideas about Darwinian truth. Now, when Jordan sort of first came on the scene in 2016, 2017, this was a phrase that you heard often, and people were trying to make sense of exactly how he was approaching things. And he would talk about Darwinian truth. He doesn't use that phrase too much anymore, but the idea is still very much with him. What do I mean by Darwinian truth? You can see the truth about something by its performance out there in the world. Now, I was listening to Jordan B. Cooper's treatment of Vatican I, and then he just has a second one out on that on Cardinal Newman, and I'm finding those to be interesting and relevant conversations. But he was going through some of the history of liberalism and the question of authority and the sourcing of authority. And so Darwinian truth is in many ways a very democratic sourcing of authority. And this is something that gets manifest in critiques of Jordan. The name Alistair Roberts might be familiar to some of you. He was on the channel a long time ago. He works for the Theopolis Institute, a very sharp guy. He followed Jordan Peterson right from the start, had one of the really early excellent blog posts recognizing, let's say, the cultural relationship between Jordan Peterson and C.S. Lewis. And he and I were sort of two of the first to kind of really jump on that. I much more in video, obviously, and Alistair had a great piece that he wrote. He did a review for First Things on We Who Wrestle with God. And it's not a completely positive review. And for that reason, some Christians who are big Jordan Peterson fans might sort of get defensive or roll their eyes. But I think his critique is basically sound and on target. And a lot of it has to do with this Darwinian sense of truth. Part of the difficulty of critique right now that I'm finding is that people, we have this epistemic revolution that is underway. This, let's say, the end of the world of facts. And depending on where people are at on that spectrum, if they're way back here in fact land, you can have Christians and new atheist types. Like, in some ways, it's funny when I read the comments and I see T. Grogan and Anselman really sort of agreeing on things. It's because of sort of the shift in the cultural foundation beneath their perspectives. And this was something I noticed a long, long time ago when this is long before Videoland. This is back when I was in college and seminary, doing a lot more exploration amongst charismatic evangelicals and full-blown Pentecostals, noticing that Pentecostalism was really a culture slide rather than a theological slide, which didn't mean that it didn't mean that there weren't theological consequences to, let's say, the underneath the slide of the substrate, but that's a lot of what's going on in here. But yet, I thought Alistair Roberts' critique, as is usual from Alistair Roberts, he's a super sharp guy, and he's a good theologian, and he's very well read, but he's also very comfortable in this metagelical realm. Somebody caught, it's so funny how I missed it completely. Somebody caught the metagelical versus metagelital. Now I can't even say it, but I had to correct the slide, so thank you for pointing that out. But this Darwinian truth has consequences, but I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure it plays out like people assume it should play out, because what Jordan Peterson's Darwinian truth focus tends to create, I think, again, as part of his who is God for Jordan Peterson and Alistair Roberts. I'll put the link below. Alistair Roberts goes into that, I think, quite nicely. If you listen to my rough drafts for Sunday, and so almost every week, if I have a sermon to do on Sunday, on Friday, I will record where my sermon is at. And I really enjoy doing that because I get good feedback from you all, because it's a rough draft. And I mean, Anselman, I praised Anselman this week too, because Anselman's a very sharp Christian, very well read, definitely has his opinions, but he often gives me good critiques. Now, sometimes his critiques are just Anselman critiques, and it's like, yeah, this is where Anselman and I are going to disagree. But sometimes he says something, I think, yeah. And like this week's rough draft, there was no strong conclusion to that sermon, and it was the point wasn't well formed, and Anselman picked up on it right away, and so I really appreciated that from him. So if you watch what happened on the church YouTube channel, you can find out how I change. You can see some of the ways that I changed the sermon for Sunday. But in my rough drafts for Sunday, I'm often noting what I call common religion, which is a lot of what you see in most of the Old Testament. It's in many ways Deuteronomic religion. It's very much a religion of law. It's akin to, well, sowing and reaping is the Old Testament phraseology for it. While not being exactly the same, a lot of Americans in sort of a loose way would see it as sort of karma. If you do the right things, you'll be blessed. If you do the wrong things, you'll be cursed. And the dominant role that the Cain and Abel story has for, I think, the shaping of Jordan Peterson's perspective on the Bible, and also given the fact that Jordan is, every now and then sometimes someone will point out quite uses of my, how I use the term modernity. And they have a point, because these these things can be super slippery in terms of figuring out how to use these words and exactly what we mean by them. Because Jordan is a very interesting mixture of his project, on one hand, is deeply modernistic in that he doesn't want to make any claims from the Bible that he cannot also support scientifically. Now that's a choice in his project, and what he himself believes privately, that's up to him. But that's been his project all along, and that's why I call it a stairway to heaven. Some people say it's a Tower to Babel, but it's basically sort of a foundationalism, and he wants to correlate the kinds of things he reads in the Bible, the kinds of mythology he has in the Bible, with what he is seeing and what he can attest to scientifically. And that's given Jordan a lot of credibility with people for whom the modernist natural supernatural distinction is a very big deal. And so that's why Jordan has been so provocative in terms of, as Destiny said to Rationality Rules, bringing people sort of right up to the edge, and then people then take the next step into a different worldview. So that's a part of the function of what Jordan has had. Now, this also makes his work very much God number one. Well, what do I mean by God number one? Again, those of you who have been following the channel for a long time know that these are sort of two boxes on my theoretical workbench where I am sort of comparing things in terms of listening closely to people, how they frame them. This first came up in the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris debates, where Jordan Peterson would say, this is God to me. And Sam Harris would be like, that's not God. And Sam Harris's God was very personal. It was sort of like a super thing in the sky, sort of like a superhero, one thing among many things in creation, whereas Jordan Peterson's God was very much part of the fabric of creation. And so if you only have God number one, you sort of have pantheism. And if you only have God number two, you sort of have a different kind of paganism, because then you've got to deal with what Ezekiel Kaufman dealt with in the 1930s with respect to the metadivine realm. And you can listen to Christine Hayes over on her Yale lectures on the Old Testament. I think it's lesson 2 where she goes into Ezekiel Kaufman and the metadivine realm. I think it's a super important observation that Kaufman made, and very helpful in terms of understanding what has happened in this long history of the Enlightenment and deism and sort of where we are now. So what tends to happen, and this also is part of the reason why Jordan's soteriology tends to be so Pelagian. In that, and again, now I hear this, I think you listen to Father Stephen DeYoung's lecture, which is now on YouTube, from the Symbolic World Summit. It's, I think, deeply, you get what you put in. That's very much it. And this question of getting what you have not earned, which is sort of a very Protestant take on grace, that meant it's certain. I think orthodoxy is a very chaotic, what is it, movement? I'm not even sure it's fair to say orthodoxy as such is a church in the same way we say Roman Catholicism is a church. Now, Roman Catholicism has tons of chaos, but orthodoxy just seems to be all over the map. I don't see them. It's so hard. I'm still trying to get my mind around orthodoxy and what on earth is going on in America in that space anyway. So often in my sermons you'll hear me talk about common religion, and then Jesus is, and again, this already starts back in Job. Jesus is messing with common religion, and this is where common religion can be very impersonal. And I think as our theological and technological imaginations progressed through history, things became very mechanical in terms of our imagination. And Jesus, I think, is much more relational. And so in the video that I released today is Monday, about the Metagelical and the relational Metagelical, the relational is deep in terms of Dallas Jenkins' imaginal relationship with Jesus. And I think Jordan finds it very interesting, but very different. Because for Jordan, so much of it is God is like potential out there. And depending on what you put in and invest and risk, it was so interesting on both Mark D. Parker's conversation with one of the founders of the Vineyard Church, who was quoting John Wimber, and Jordan in the Dallas Jenkins basically equated faith with risk. And that's definitely a true thing, that faith and risk, because it's all about dependence and trust and extending oneself. So what this means is that Jordan's religion tends to be more mechanistic. God, in that sense, is a ready relationship to when you call upon him, but he's not something, as C.S. Lewis notes in his critique of pantheism, God isn't necessarily someone that goes out after you. There's little of the hound of heaven in Jordan's system unless you want to sort of conceptualize potential or liability as agentic. So what that means, again, is for Jordan, he looks at the world, and when something blossoms as successful, Jordan pays a lot of attention to it. And he says, okay, this is revelatory about God. In a similar way to which, if a scientist is doing something in a test tube, when you get a certain outcome in that chemical and you get the color you're looking for, okay, this is revelatory about the potential that God is. And so when the chosen comes along, this is something that Jordan will pay attention to. And again, now I isolated some of the... Now, these are not from the Daily Wire exclusive. I can't play those, otherwise I'll get a copyright strike. But these are from the YouTube. These are from the YouTube conversation, and it very much sort of connects with it. So part of there was a number of points in the Daily Wire exclusive video that were important. One of which is that when Jenkins finishes the Jesus series, he's going to go back and do Moses, which Jordan Peterson was very excited about because obviously they'd done the Exodus series. There's a fair amount of comparing and contrasting and talking about the Exodus series versus the Jesus seminar and Jordan Peterson's seminar versus the Chosen. And also, also in terms of how they sort of fundraised for this. And, Jordan noting that, and I think he's right on this, and I think that the Jesus seminar shows it, that when Daily Wire is releasing each episode of the Jesus seminar, as they did the Exodus seminar, one a week, but and I've seen this with my own YouTubes when I do a little series, as the series goes on, people lose interest, your numbers decline. It's basically people get fatigued, or people had an initial interest and they lost interest, or people just weren't that interested in it. So it's a pretty remarkable thing when you can sort of grow a series, as I think Chosen has done. And the Chosen has done this partly by virtue of their distribution model and the evolution of how they've been distributing it. And so there was a fair amount of sort of comparing notes between Jordan and Jenkins and the Daily Wire exclusive, and talking about, well, what's the best way to do this? And, I would imagine that, well, Disney, of course, has played with this, because back in the day, they had the theatrical releases, and then they would redo theatrical releases like a generation later so other kids could catch up and see it. And then, of course, when VHS came out, then they would sell the VHS tapes, but Disney would sort of sell them and then take them back, and then sell them and take them back. And because in that way, sort of creating, and of course, when they'd re-release them, they'd add a few little bonus things to them. And of course, then when DVD came out, sell them and take them back. And you see the same kind of churn going on streaming. Movies come to Netflix, movies go away from Netflix. And even some of these streaming services that, let's say, own the content already, they make things available and then they take them back. And in that way, they continue to sort of spur sales of DVD sales and Blu-ray sales. And then they get to advertise, oh, coming to Max, such and such a movie. And then it'll go over to Netflix, and I'm sure they'll gain some revenue from that way. So they talked about some of the business models behind it. One of the things I didn't know and I was very curious about was how popular The Chosen is to overseas markets. Now, the Jesus movie gets a mention in the Daily Wire exclusive. And the Jesus movie was very interesting to me because, again, and I mentioned this in the previous video, when I was a foreign missionary, there were some missionaries who came down to the Dominican Republic. They got a generator, they got a movie projector, they got a copy of the Jesus movie, and they would go to all these little remote locations and they would show the Jesus movie. And it would be, how should we talk about this? It would be effective evangelistically if what you're measuring is people who would come forward and identify as wanting to start a relationship with Jesus. So I'm going to put this video out after my mystical personal relationship with Jesus video. I might, because there's a holiday this week, and so I'm not going to be in the office every day and I have other responsibilities this week. We'll see how many videos get out this week. That's always an issue with these holiday weeks. So I was very curious about how well The Chosen is doing overseas for this reason. Whenever you bring a book to movie or TV or video, you need filler. And then the question is, where does the filler come from? Now, just saying that, there's a certain frame around there. Because, as Jenkins points out a number of times, the old frame was sort of this bricks of facts, and for people to value the movie, they should only have bricks of facts. Jenkins makes the point, which actually when he said it in the Daily Wire exclusive, it was like pointed right at me. Because again, people were telling me about The Chosen. So where am I going to start? Well, I'm going to start all the way at episode 1. And within 10 or 15 minutes of it, I was annoyed. And so I stopped. And I never picked it up again. And then somebody asked me about it. And I told them my experience with it. And I got comments and emails and from people who were, oh, please try it again. Don't say anything against The Chosen. And these people are Orthodox, Protestant, and Catholics. Again, Metagelicals. So, and then as I said, when I was flying home from the East Coast on Thanksgiving after visiting my family out there, I was in a dark plane and a long flight and listening to things, as that's what I usually do on planes. I usually don't watch stuff. I usually just listen to stuff. But in the row in front of me, someone was watching The Chosen on the monitor, on the screen on the back of the other seat. And it was the subtitles were on. And so I'm listening to something and I start watching this and I'm reading the subtitles. And so I stop listening and I just keep watching via the subtitles. I thought, wow, I sort of like the way he handled this. This was, I think this was Jesus after his sermon in Nazareth where they want to kill him. And again, I am not principially opposed to gospel fan fiction. I've said on the channel a number of times, Anne Rice's story of Jesus, I found very moving. Now, one isn't going to mistake Anne Rice's Jesus for the four canonical Gospels. And of course, I've already had my conversation with Neil Avert, who wrote the single gospel that Jordan is using for this. So I'm not opposed to it, but I'm sort of, here's the thing. As anybody who's watching this channel a long time, I'm very high in openness, but I've also got certain beliefs, and so that causes dissonance. So I watch these things, and part of me likes them, and another part of me has questions. Phlebas in the comments section, did that guy just say Jesus feeding the 5,000 is analogous to his commercial success? There is some health and wealth stuff I get a vibe, I get a health and wealth vibe, not full-blown health and wealth, but a little bit of a health and wealth vibe from Jenkins, and that's definitely a piece of the broader evangelical DNA. Another comment, and I'm sure The Chosen, I wouldn't want to read their emails. I mean, I can just imagine the hate mails they get, but again, they're also enormously successful. Now, the thing is, Christians can flip on that so quickly, because if Christians are in agreement with, they say, if something's enormously successful, let's say it's very popular and it's making a lot of money and lots of people are seeing it, and you seem to be getting conversions and people getting interested in Jesus, there's two biblical ways to read that. One is, see, God's hand is upon it. And the other is, well, itching ears, That's certainly the devil's work. And so it's, and critics point that out, and hey, fair enough, you're right. And so movies portraying Jesus, are they not blasphemous? And Phlebas, especially when it's fan fiction. So Phlebas has weighed in on The Chosen, and you can direct your comments to Phlebas in the comment section. I'm sure he'll be happy to hear it. But I want to get into this question of filler, because they actually talk about this in the YouTube portion of the conversation.
Let's continue. What happens?
So, for the next few months, I'm like, well, I what's my future? Now, I happen to be, we won't get into this, but I happen to be working at a church in Illinois at this time. So I had made certain movies, but they had hired me to come make movies within the context.
Now, when he says a certain church in Illinois, the fact that he didn't say the name, of course, was like, I betcha I can find out what church. And it was Harvest Bible Church in Illinois, which was, McDonald was the name of the pastor, who had a pretty dramatic crash and burn. So that was interesting. You didn't name the church, but fair enough. Go on.
Of this large church in Illinois. And so one of the things that I had done previously was for Good Friday services or for Christmas services at this huge church of 12,000 people, which had huge Good Friday services, 8 of them over the course of 2 days for 2,000 people per service. My task was to make these short films or vignettes about Jesus. And so going back as far as, 2012, I was doing these little, like it's where I met Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in The Chosen, I was doing a short film about the crucifixion from the perspective of the 2 thieves on the cross. And so this notion of telling the stories that I've heard hundreds of times, but from different perspectives, had already proven itself over the last 5 years to be an extraordinary tool in unlocking people's emotional connection to the story.
Okay. So he's telling it from different perspectives, and you're looking to unlock people's emotional connection to the story. And again, as Jenkins said, pastors do that all the time. Jordan does that all the time. And what it reminded me of is this sort of made me think again about folk Christianity. There's certain songs. The crazy thing about Christianity is it really does well with different classes. And this is something that Lewis noted. And in some ways, there's all this kitsch. And some of you, I'm going to start naming some Protestant evangelical kitsch. Thomas Kincaid, Sam Butcher, Precious Moments. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about, but I know that there are Catholic varieties, because part of it is people, when they have something that they love, are going to invest creatively in it. And now part of what happens in the Protestant Reformation is that there is a real move to rein this in. And a lot of the iconoclasm, the putting away of relics and then using a physical concordist standard. Is this really a piece of the cross? Is this really part of Noah's Ark? And again, I got triggered in that when I went to St. Peter's, not St. Peter's Basilica, but the one of the churches, one of the papal churches in Rome, where they have the chains of Peter. And, when I talked to Cale about that, Cale was saying, those relics are powerful for me because they help make the story real. And I think that's exactly right. That's why they're so effective. And also, of course, Dallas Jenkins making this emotional connection and sort of filling it out helps make the story real. And what Jenkins is doing is, again, completely natural. Preachers do it. Now, the question is, and I played that clip later later from this conversation, the question is one of authority. And this is where you get into, well, to one degree or another, let's say the universal history that Peugeot and Roland are working on is connected here, because in a lot of ways, The Chosen is universal history.
Did you see when you were making those films? What sort of impact was that having?
So, for example, instead of being just what most Bible projects are, like I assume you've seen, have you seen the Jesus of Nazareth miniseries? Have you seen any of these kind of Jesus movies?
No. The Chosen is the one that I've watched.
Oh, well, good.
And again, so Tammy's done some lengthy interviews with Ruslan. I've only caught some of the little clips of it. I haven't sat down and watched the whole thing. But, part of this is Jordan's life is changing because Tammy and Michaela are churchgoers now. And so that's going to impact probably, I don't know, never been to their home, but probably Tammy and Jordan are sitting down and watching The Chosen together. I'm projecting, I'm filling in because, if I'm going to watch The Chosen, I'm probably going to have to watch it with my wife. So the question is here, okay, so he hasn't watched any of these he didn't grow up evangelical, didn't see all these Jesus movies. I should probably pull some of those Jesus movies, because for a while I was sort of collecting them because they fascinate me. I don't have a copy of Last Temptation. I did see that in the theater. I saw it when it was in the theater, and it was fascinating because there are a whole bunch from the local evangelical church in New Jersey, Hawthorne Gospel. There were, I don't know if it was Hawthorne Gospel, but someone was protesting at the theater, and me and my sisters just went in. we crossed the line. It was a boring movie. It wasn't a good movie. So, hey, if you're gonna do midrash, if you're gonna do gospel fan fiction, if you're gonna do gospel universal history, make it compelling.
But the genre of biblical filmmaking, particularly Jesus filmmaking, tends to be verse by verse. It's a reenactment of the verses that you're reading. It's not a story per se that you're telling that follows traditional 3-act structure, other than the fact that a lot of Jesus stories do. But it's, and then Jesus did this, and then Jesus did that, and then he encountered a blind man.
Right. So is it fair to say that that's the subordination of the movie to the text?
Yes. And
Right.
Which makes for sometimes an enjoyable recreation of what you already believe, but certainly not a good movie.
So it's an enjoyable recreation. Well, what's enjoyable about it? Well, I think psychologically it goes like this. I remember when Lord of the Rings came out in movie, and I'm just like, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to hurt it? Are they not going to hurt it? Are they going to be true to the book? Are they not going to be true to the book? Then the Lord of the movies came out, and it's like, okay, they did a little fudging here and there, but for the most part, good. And it got a lot better, of course, when they made The Hobbit into a trilogy, and even that, towards the end of the year, we usually watch Lord of the Rings, and then the big question in the family is, are we going to watch The Hobbit? And the answer is usually, if we watch any of it, it's only going to be the first one. It's not going to be the second one with the dwarf and the elf stuff. And it's definitely not going to be the third one when Legolas runs up a waterfall. No. Even though part of you want to see the battle of 5 armies, you want to see what the dwarves look like. So I think people today sort of want to see Jesus inhabit their screens. But if they're really devoted to the Bible, and especially if they've got a fairly modernist conceptualization of truth, the liberties that the filmmaker are going to use are going to be pretty annoying. And this is where one of the things that Peterson and Jenkins talk about in the Daily Wire exclusive is the timing. And I think Peterson is very right on this, that this would not have done well 20 years ago. This definitely is helped by the rise of the nuns. Because the rise of the nuns, as people are more spiritual and not religious, they are going to evaluate something in terms of how well it emotionally connects with them. Now, you can critique that and evaluate it, but you do not go to church, you do not have a relationship with Jesus, you do not become a religious nerd, you do not become a devotee unless something in you emotionally connects to it. We are deeply emotional creatures.
Movie.
Yeah, and that's a crucial thing. It's a crucial thing, I have a very large collection of Russian propaganda art, like 400 pieces.
Okay, in this section, Peterson's going to talk about the propaganda, and he goes into why. So why do Christian movies so often bomb? And Peterson is right, because they're propagandistic. And I think Peter's also right here that good art is more evocative than pronouncement. I think just psychologically it lands flat if we know where the movie ends. And that's just basically the heart of spoilers. So
propaganda.
Yeah,
you learned that you were telling stories, and you were doing that by showing these stories from a new light. Okay, so how did you come across that as an idea?
Well, ironically enough, I was listening to a sermon from a pastor in Louisville. His name is Kyle Eidelman. And he did a sermon on the crucifixion, and the story of the crucifixion and Jesus's relationship with the 2 thieves on the cross takes just a few verses.
Right.
So in just a few verses, a man goes from mocking Jesus and seeing those mocking Jesus and joining in on the mockery, and within just a few verses says, I want to be with you. I believe in you.
Right. A lot of transformation packed into a very short period of time.
As a storyteller, it's pretty bad storytelling.
Okay, so you're going to have to fill this in. And you're going to fill it in from your imagination. And this is where I wondered, to what degree would this do well in other cultures? Because our imaginations are at least partially a product of our culture. Now, they're also a product of the physical world. I know a lot of people, some, especially where you're at, get frustrated with me as I bang on about, I'll just call it, you get issues with the M word, physical concordism. Okay. But physical concordism is tremendously powerful because we as human beings in the constraints of the physical world around us, this generates commonalities and common experiences between us. Our biological commonality, our physical commonality. Therefore, as we sort of imagine out from there, those commonalities can be related to in other cultures. And it's also partly because he tells a story in, let's see if I can find it. This is Jenkins talking. One of the most moving moments of my entire life was when I saw clips of the president of Madagascar who loves the show, but 70% of the country doesn't have electricity and has never seen television. So he's doing things like putting it on trucks and driving it to these far-off places and showing it to them. And they've had screenings of season 1, season 3, which is Jesus and the children. Do you remember that episode where he comes across, the two children come across to the campsite? And they talked about it with a full conversation you and I have had. He builds a kind of friendship with these kids. And they come every day to visit him and to hear from him. And they see him brushing his teeth in the stream. And again, so this is, let's say, the commonality that you can have because teeth need cleaning. And if you're in a undeveloped region, a rural region, and you're getting your water from a stream, you're going to go down to this stream. And in the Dominican Republic, kids were water carriers. In the morning, you'd see the kids trundle out there. They had their galones, these plastic gallons, and they would go down there and they'd fill up the galones and they'd bring it back to their house that didn't have running water. That's what you do. And so there's a connection here that you can make between their life and Jesus. And again, so for those of you that are like, I get it. Trust me, I'm with you there. But another side of me understands that this is where Vervaeke talks about the imaginal. And I think this has a lot to do, oh gosh, I'm going to probably get in trouble with this. With Marian appearances in the world. You don't have a mystical Christianity, we'll use the ortho language. You don't have a personal relationship with Jesus if you're not sort of living with Jesus. Brother Lawrence, the practice of continual prayer. You're just having a conversation with Jesus all day long. Now, are you using your imagination? Yes. Are you probably adding all kinds of fillers that are from you and wrong or even immoral or misguided? I'm sure of it. And again, as a pastor, I sit and listen to people, and people always have it. And, God told them this and God told them that. And not just Pentecostals, but people who are evangelicals. And yes. You listen, I'm just like, I don't think God really told them that. But sometimes God tells people something, and later on I have to agree, even though I initially disagreed, because just like they've got their filler, I've got my filler. And, the T in Calvinism is total depravity, which doesn't mean I'm as bad as I could be, but it does mean that every part of me misses the mark to one degree or another. And so, well, here we are.
No journey. We just know he was mocking him a few verses later. He believed in him. There's no three-act structure. I mean, I guess there's the first and the third act. There's the before and the after, but there's no middle. And so what would lead him? This pastor was saying, what might have he heard from Jesus that could have caused him to break, right? Mm-hmm. And so this pastor opined, not claiming fact, but he opined, what if he was broken by Jesus's comment, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Some of this, he's being mocked.
Well, that would be a thing to be broken by if you actually saw it happen.
Right. So you're mocking him, you're joining in the mockery, and he's just completely, not only is he not fazed and broken by it, he's actually praying for the forgiveness of the people who are doing it.
And he means it.
Right. So that's what his opinion was, and I thought that was very compelling, and I thought I want to make a short film where we unpack the...
And again, I think this is in many ways akin to universal history, because what happens in universal history is that, as Richard Rowland has said in their great series, if Jesus is going to be real to you, you're going to have to do the synthesis of weaving him into your world. And that's what something like this does. Now, one of the differences that there is between something like this and, let's say, the canonical Gospels is that this will have a short shelf life. If you watch, one of the things that I was thinking about paying a little bit more attention to is watching some of the like Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, The Robe, some of these movies from the 50s. And when we watch them today, boy, they feel strange. They had a short shelf life. Also mentioned the Daily Wire exclusive. The Hollywood is now all excited about doing religious programming again. Again, this is cyclical. We saw it in the 80s. For Hollywood, it's a commercial enterprise. Even if they don't believe it, they'll find somebody who does believe it and say, "You make the movie, and if it sells, I'm happy. I don't care if you're selling Jesus. Sell away. Sell Muhammad. Sell Ganesh. Sell Krishna. Sell whatever. If it's making money, do it." I mean, we've seen that. Eat, pray, love. I mean, that Hollywood is a commercial enterprise. They are there to sell movies. And the little fever that Disney has had over wokeness, I knew that would pass because it's a bad religion. It's a lousy religion. It doesn't work. So that's not going to pass. Another point to be made from this is Tom Holland has that great quote from his Dellingpod appearance early on, because he says, well, maybe I can pull it up. I use it in my slides, and just to dig it out right now would be just, but basically 4 different authors wrote an account of one man that has been compelling not only across cultures in the first century, but across cultures in every century since. And those are the 4 canonical Gospels. And Holland says it's an astounding literary feat. And what I usually finish him saying is, why is it such an astounding literary feat? Because the person they are writing about was so astounding that even through the human authors of the gospel, of course, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, I believe in the inspiration of Scripture, this is compelling. But the fact that Jesus is compelling even through, and I'm sure Dallas Jenkins would be the first to admit that he's doing a storytelling, and so this is not gospel. He says it a number of times in there. But generally speaking, if you're looking to write a character that you hope will be compelling in your story, there's nobody better to pick than Jesus. He's just a publishing superstar. Again, Anne Rice, I found Anne Rice's book compelling. I think it probably sold fairly well. And she went on to write vampire stories, but as did Tom Holland. There's this vampire theme going on. So I think that's another critical factor in this. Let's see, was there anything else in here I wanted to touch on?
Old and was wrestling with that, right? So
Well, and there are people who are natural storytellers. I mean, that's a real gift, and it's.
Well, my father is an author of over 200 books. He's one of the most prolific authors of all time.
Right. So you came by it honestly.
Yes. And so I'm a storyteller in the classroom. I was a storyteller when I wasn't supposed to be. I've always been a storyteller. So when a pastor is unpacking 3 to 4 verses with an intellectual conclusion, the part that speaks most to me is the story part of it.
Yeah.
What might have been the backstory? I'm like, I'm on the case.
You see with Christ's parables frequently like an amalgam of those 2 approaches, because he'll tell a story, and then the disciples, for example, will say, well, thank you, but we don't really get it. And then he'll lay out the explanation. I've certainly found in my lectures that the most effective way of driving a point home is to tell a story and to provide an explanation, right? The story is brought, this is...
I've played some of these before in the previous video, and it's the video that I'm playing here. It's all from the YouTube video, so you can just go watch it. But again, the Daily Wire exclusive conversation I thought was really good and really interesting, and so it was worthwhile. But to watch it, you gotta pay that bastion of movement conservatism, Daily Wire. So yeah, leave a comment. Let me know what you think.